Chief Justice Raymond Zondo says the governing party's failure to recall former President Jacob Zuma has actually cost South Africans billions of rands. The Chief Justice was speaking at the Oliver Tambo lecture at Fort Hare University. Let's get some reaction now from Mbekezeli Benjamin, who's with Judges Matter. Mbekezeli, thank you so much for making time for us. So the Chief Justice speaking at Fort Hare around the failure to recall the former President Jacob Zuma much earlier. So my first reaction when I saw this was, is he speaking as the chair of the state capture inquiry, who's merely reflecting on evidence presented and I suppose the consequences of the failure to act urgently against Zuma, or as the Chief Justice who's reflecting on political events? What's your reaction as Judges Matter?
Good afternoon, Clement, and good afternoon to your viewers. Well, I think he's speaking in his former hat as the chairperson of the State Capture Commission, because you'll recall that the Oliver Tambo lecture was actually meant to take place about a year ago, which is when the university invited Justice Zondo. So he would have been speaking in his capacity then as the chairperson of the State Capture Commission. But of course, it's now been almost a year since that last final report was released. And so one would expect that he would sort of move on to other priorities. Because, for example, as Judges Matter, would have loved to hear the Chief Justice speak a little bit more about the issues in the judiciary. Last month, he released the Judiciary Annual Report, which showed that a lot of courts are having serious backlogs in the criminal courts. The effects of load shedding are also causing increased backlogs. So we would have loved to hear the Chief Justice speak a little bit more about that. But there was a context to his comments as they were broadcast online.
Yeah, and does it matter in what capacity he speaks under? Because as a Chief Justice, obviously, I imagine you don't want to make, a political statement like this one, suggesting that a political party should have recalled a sitting president much earlier. My understanding of the Code of Judicial Conduct is that it limits aspect of a judge's life. Like, they may not speak on specific issues that may draw the judge into, or even the judiciary into political controversy, because you don't really know what issue you may have to adjudicate on in the future. So does it matter that, well, he was invited in his capacity as the chair of the commission or in his capacity as Chief Justice? Well,
you're quite right. The Code of Conduct and generally judicial ethics make it very clear that judges must restrain themselves. They cannot involve themselves in anything that will draw up a political controversy. So they may not speak on certain topics or be involved in certain meetings or activities if those will bring that judge or the judiciary into some sort of political controversy. So we all expect judges to avoid involving themselves in those kinds of activities and also to try and avoid anything that will link them to any sort of political controversy. So that's, I think, the first and most important part. But there's also a complexity in that judges also get involved in things like commissions of inquiry. And certain of the commissions of inquiry do bring up political issues or political controversies of the day. So in fulfilling that role, it sometimes is inevitable that at times they will bring up issues that might be seen as political. In fact, when I listened back to what the Chief Justice said, there's very little that he said that was new, that was not already in the public domain. A lot of what he said was heard as testimony at the State Capture Commission. It was included in the final report. So there's nothing new that he said that wasn't that would have drawn a new political controversy. But of course, we do expect him as the Chief Justice and the head of our judiciary to be very careful in trying to minimize any sort of thing that will bring him into controversy. Not to say that this statement has or will likely draw him into political controversy, but we hope that he would be very careful in approaching it. And you, earlier on, you mentioned that is there a difference between the two roles?
Yeah.
Well, there really shouldn't be, because judges are held to the same standard both in their private lives, but more importantly in the office, a serious office of of being in the judiciary. So we don't expect for there to be a huge difference in between the two worlds, and that's why it's so important that judges are always careful and pay particular attention to the code of conduct in terms of what they may do and not do.
Is it clearly defined, though, as to what constitutes political controversy? Or is that something that is tested once there is controversy?
Well, there isn't a clear definition in the law, but we expect our judges to be careful, right? The specific clause in the Code of Conduct that speaks about involvement in political controversy has a heading of restraint, which means by default, judges must restrain themselves. They must be cautious. So if anything that they would be involved in has a potential of of drawing political controversy, they must err on the side of caution. They must try and avoid that situation as much as possible. But we do understand that there may be circumstances where it is almost inevitable. I made an example of commissions of inquiry, for example.
Yeah.
So those are some of the unique circumstances, but there isn't a hard and fast definition of what political controversy may be.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit now about the National Conference on the Constitution that was held until Friday. There were some reflections on the Constitution and the road ahead. But this conference comes at the time when there's been a robust debate really among South Africans as to whether the Constitution has really achieved what it was intended for or not. What have been your reflections as Judges Matter?
Well, first and foremost, a conference of this nature is a really, really important activity. We should always reflect on how much the Constitution is working and try and think about ways in which to improve the way that it is working for ordinary South Africans. So first and foremost, we support the initiative of the conference. And again, it comes 25 years into this new Constitution. We're still trying to figure our way around how the Constitution works. The United States has had a Constitution for over 300 years, and they're still debating about what it means today. So for us, being 25 years in, it's still quite early days. But I think listening to most of the panels at the conference, I got the clear sense that people believe that the Constitution has worked. It has achieved, for example, the right to housing, the right to education, and it has opened up opportunities for many South Africans that would not have otherwise been achieved. But there's also some criticism, right, for the Constitution. People feel that it hasn't gone far enough. But there's also a sense on particular issues like land, for example, where people have been saying the Constitution has prohibited or stopped land from being redistributed. And what I got from the conference was that the Constitution was not, in fact, the problem. The problem was the systems to allow people to get land. You know, for you to put in a land claim, let's say you put in a land claim in Mpumalanga, for example, you need historical research, you need archival research, you need a lawyer who's able to navigate the land laws around the area, and so that you may be able to process your land claim. So without those systems being built by government, we can have a superb constitution, but it will still fail to achieve its mission because the systems that are there to implement the constitution are not in place. So that is one of the key impressions that I got from the conference last week.
So some of what was discussed was transforming and building an independent and resilient judiciary. From your assessment as Judges Matter, how do we fare?
Well, that panel was particularly important. There were really three very superb speakers who spoke about the issue of transforming the judiciary and protecting its independence. How we fare as a society, I think we can easily say our judiciary is strong. Its independence is treasured by both the judges, and generally society respects the authority of the judiciary. But of course, there are problems within the judiciary, which were highlighted at the conference, one of which is that the Judicial Service Commission is not working as best as it should. One of the key criticisms is that it doesn't have criteria for how judges are appointed. That is something that we are aware that SC is paying attention to, and we expect in the next couple of weeks they will announce a major development on that. But generally, there's also issues about how the system in the judiciary is working in terms of funding and resources provided to judges, and the ways in which there's a lot of sort of lawfare, which is a lot of the political disputes that should be settled in parliament, in the streets, or in political branches, they actually end up in the courts. And that's a threat to the institution of the judiciary. So those are some of the threats, but overall, we have a strong and independent judiciary in South Africa.
Mbekezeli Benjamin, thank you so much for making time. He's with Judges Matter.